Welcome to the Deep Stories channel, where emotions intertwine with the unexpected, and life lessons are revealed in the most surprising situations. Today, we bring you a story that will touch your heart in ways you never imagined. Imagine visiting the grave of a loved one, only to find something, or someone, that completely changes your view of love and life. Get ready for a journey of discoveries with our story. When visiting her husband's grave, woman discovers a secret kept by a boy. Part 1. The Unexpected Encounter. Emily Parker could never have imagined that cold autumn morning would bring something that would change her life forever. Since the death of her husband, Michael, a year earlier, she had isolated herself in a solitary routine, marked by a constant sadness that seemed to envelop every aspect of her existence. Michael had been her love, her confidant, and her anchor in a world that was often uncertain. Losing him in a tragic car accident had left her devastated, and the local cemetery, with its ancient trees and shaded paths, had become a place where Emily could feel some connection to him, even if from a distance. It was a typical autumn morning in Maplewood, Illinois. The golden and reddish leaves fell from the trees in slow spirals, creating a soft carpet on the ground. The air was cool, with a light mist hovering over the cemetery, giving the place a melancholic yet strangely serene atmosphere. Emily bundled up more in her wool coat, pulling her scarf closer to her face as she walked down the familiar path toward Michael's headstone. She had been coming to this cemetery at least 3 times a week. The path was already etched in her mind, and she could walk it with her eyes closed. As she reached the small clearing where Michael rested, Emily stopped abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone was sitting on Michael's headstone. A small boy, no more than 8 years old, with disheveled brown hair and a look of curiosity on his face. The boy did not seem immediately aware of Emily's presence. He had his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the headstone as if reading something there or perhaps absorbing some deep thought. He looked so calm, so at peace, that for a moment, Emily hesitated to interrupt him. There was something almost supernatural about his presence there, in that sacred place for her. "What are you doing here?" Emily finally asked, her voice coming out softer than she expected. The boy looked up, his big, bright eyes meeting Emily's. There was a depth in them that seemed impossible for someone his age. He stared at her for a long moment before responding, as if deciding whether to share some secret or not. "I was waiting for you," he said, with a clear and innocent voice but loaded with a strange certainty. Emily frowned, confused. "Waiting for me? What do you mean? Who are you?" The boy, who had remained seated until then, slowly stood up. He didn't seem intimidated or uncomfortable, as most children would be when encountering a stranger in a cemetery. "My name is Jacob," he said simply. "I knew you would come." The boy's words left Emily even more perplexed. For a moment, she considered the possibility that he was the child of someone visiting another part of the cemetery, perhaps a visitor who had gotten lost. But something about the way he spoke, the confidence in his voice, suggested that this was not the case. "Where are your parents, Jacob?" Emily asked, trying to stay calm. "Are you alone here?" Jacob shook his head. "I'm not alone. I'm here with him." He pointed to Michael's headstone, as if that explained everything. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Did you know my husband?" Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of disbelief and hope. Could it be possible that Michael had mentioned something to someone before his death? But logic quickly reminded her that Jacob was just a boy, and Michael would not have known a child so young. Jacob did not answer immediately. He looked back at the headstone, as if finding comfort in the words engraved there. "I didn't know him the way you did," he finally said, his enigmatic words leaving Emily more confused than ever. "Why are you here, Jacob?" Emily pressed, trying to understand what was happening. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" Jacob smiled slightly, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It seemed more like a smile of understanding, as if he knew something Emily had yet to grasp. "I'm here for you, Emily," he said simply. Emily was stunned. How did this boy know her name? A sense of unreality began to envelop her thoughts, as if she were trapped in a dream from which she couldn't wake. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice slightly louder than she intended. Jacob did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a step toward Emily, extending his small hand to hold hers. She looked at the outstretched hand, feeling a mix of fear and fascination. Hesitantly, she took his hand, expecting to feel the cold touch of a lost and lonely child, but instead found a surprising warmth and comfort. "I knew you would come," Jacob repeated, as if that explained everything. "I was waiting for you so that you wouldn't be alone." Emily didn't know what to say. The situation was too surreal, but at the same time, there was something inexplicably comforting about the boy's presence. She found herself unable to resist the strange sense of familiarity that he exuded. "Why me?" Emily finally asked, her voice softer, almost a whisper. "Why are you here for me?" Jacob looked at her with a gentle expression, but one filled with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "Because you need me now," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. The pain of losing Michael, the overwhelming loneliness that had dominated her life since then. It all seemed to find some relief in the presence of this boy. She didn't know why or how, but at that moment, Jacob seemed to be exactly what she needed. She pulled the boy into a hug, and he was receptive, wrapping his small arms around her with a tenderness that warmed Emily's heart. For a brief moment, she felt as if everything was right again, as if the world had ceased to be such a cold and empty place. When they finally separated, Emily looked at Jacob's face and saw something that made her believe that there was more to this child than met the eye. Perhaps he was an angel or a messenger sent by Michael. Perhaps it was something she would never fully understand. But one thing was certain. She couldn't let him go. "Let's go home, Jacob," she said softly. "Let's figure this out together." The boy nodded, holding her hand firmly. As they walked out of the cemetery, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The mystery of Jacob and what he meant to her was something she was determined to uncover, regardless of the answers she might find. Part 2. The Mystery of Jacob. As Emily walked back home with Jacob by her side, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was an unexpected tranquility in having him there, holding her hand, but also a growing curiosity that began to dominate her thoughts. Who was this boy? How did he know her name, and why did he seem so familiar, even though she was certain she had never seen him before? The afternoon was already beginning to fade, and the soft light of the setting sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets of Maplewood. When they arrived at Emily's home, a cozy two-story house with a wraparound porch and a well-kept garden, she found herself hesitating at the entrance. She looked at Jacob, who stood beside her, his eyes still fixed on her, as if waiting for some instruction or permission to enter. There was something about him that made Emily feel that, despite his young age, he was much more than he appeared. "Do you want to come in?" Emily asked, feeling the need to break the silence that had formed between them. Jacob nodded slightly. "I would like that, yes." She opened the door and let the boy enter first, watching as he looked around the living room with a curious but calm gaze, as if he were recognizing a place he had only seen in dreams. Emily realized she was holding her breath and let out a sigh as she closed the door behind her. "Do you want anything? A glass of milk? Something to eat?" she asked, trying to ignore the strangeness of the situation. How should she act in a moment like this? There was no manual for dealing with mysterious children found in cemeteries. "Milk would be nice," Jacob replied, with a smile that once again seemed far too mature for someone his age. Emily went to the kitchen and began preparing a glass of milk, watching him from time to time. Jacob sat on the sofa, his hands resting on his lap, as if he were perfectly at ease in this new environment. It was as if he had been part of that house forever. When Emily returned with a glass of milk, she handed it to Jacob and sat down in the armchair across from him. She watched as he took small sips, becoming more and more intrigued by his presence. "Jacob, can you tell me more about yourself?" she asked carefully, not wanting to pressure him but unable to resist the need to know more. Jacob looked at the glass for a moment before responding, his voice low and filled with an uncommon calm. "There's not much to tell. I've been waiting for you today, as I have for some time." "Waiting for me? But why?" Emily felt a small wave of anxiety in her chest. Something about Jacob's tranquility made her uneasy. "Because you need me now," he said simply, as if the answer were obvious. Emily remained silent, processing his words. "And how do you know that? How do you know that I need you?" Jacob looked at her with an almost melancholic expression. "I know because he told me. He said you would be alone, that you would miss him. I came to help you." She felt her heart tighten. "He? Are you talking about Michael?" The words came out almost as a whisper, her husband's name still so painful to pronounce. Jacob only nodded, saying nothing more. Emily felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Could it be possible that Jacob was there as some kind of messenger, sent by Michael to help her overcome the pain? The idea seemed absurd, but at the same time, Jacob's presence was comforting in a way she couldn't explain. "Jacob, you said you knew Michael. How did he tell you these things?" Emily tried to keep her voice steady, but emotion was overwhelming her. Jacob placed the glass of milk on the coffee table and looked directly into Emily's eyes. "I didn't know him the way you did, but I feel what he felt. I know he loved you, and I know he wanted you to be happy, even without him. That's why I came." The boy's words hit Emily like a wave. She felt her eyes fill with tears, but she couldn't look away from Jacob. "How can you know that? You're just a boy. How can you know what Michael felt?" Jacob gave a sad smile, as if he understood the pain she was feeling. "Because I'm a part of you, Emily. I'm a part of him too." His words echoed in Emily's mind. Part of her wanted to reject it all as a fantasy, an illusion created by her mind to cope with the loss. But there was something so real about Jacob's presence, something that made her want to believe. Before she could say anything else, the phone in the kitchen rang, breaking the spell of the moment. Emily blinked, trying to pull herself together. "I'll get that. Don't go anywhere, okay?" Jacob nodded, and she got up, walking toward the kitchen with slow steps. When she answered the phone, she was greeted by the familiar voice of her friend, Sarah. "Hi, Emily, it's me. I was thinking of coming over later. Maybe we can have dinner together." Sarah's voice was cheerful, but Emily could sense the hidden concern. Sarah was always around, trying to ensure that Emily didn't sink too deeply into loneliness. Sarah. "Actually, something strange is happening here right now," Emily began to explain, glancing at the living room where Jacob was still sitting, so calm. "Something strange? What do you mean? What happened?" Sarah asked, now clearly worried. I don't know how to explain it, but I found a boy in the cemetery today. He's here with me now, and he knows things about me and about Michael that no one else should know." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "A boy? And you brought him home? Emily, is that safe? Did he say who his parents are?" "He said he was waiting for me. His name is Jacob, and I don't know, Sarah. There's something about him that makes me think he's not just any ordinary child." Sarah was silent for a moment before responding. "I'm coming over now, Emily. Don't leave the house. I'll help you figure out what's going on." Emily agreed, feeling relieved by the offer of help. She hung up the phone and returned to the living room, where Jacob was still sitting, now flipping through a book she had left on the table. There was a sense of peace around him, an aura that seemed to dispel any fear Emily might have had. "My friend Sarah is coming over," Emily said as she sat down again. "She's going to help us figure out what's happening." Jacob looked at her and smiled, a smile full of an understanding that she still couldn't fully grasp. "It's okay, Emily. Everything is going to be fine." His words echoed in Emily's mind like a promise that, regardless of the answers they found, everything would finally make sense. She just needed to wait and believe. Part 3. Revelations at the Cemetery. Emily could barely keep calm while waiting for Sarah to arrive. Time seemed to drag on, each second weighing on her shoulders as she looked at Jacob, who remained surprisingly calm and serene on the living room sofa. There was a tranquility about him that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions raging inside Emily. She got up several times, pacing the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could a boy so young know so much about her, about Michael? His words, "I am part of you and him," echoed in her mind, confusing and disturbing her. When the doorbell finally rang, Emily almost ran to answer it. Upon opening the door, she found Sarah, who was observing her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Sarah was a practical woman, used to dealing with difficult situations, but even she seemed unsettled by what Emily had told her on the phone. "Emily, what's going on? Where is this boy?" Sarah asked without preamble, stepping into the house and closing the door behind her. "He's in the living room," Emily replied, gesturing toward where Jacob was. "He's strange, Sarah. He knows things about me, about Michael. Things he shouldn't know." Sarah nodded, walking toward the living room. When she saw Jacob, she paused for a moment, studying him carefully. He looked so innocent, sitting there, flipping through a book like any child would. But something about the way he behaved, the calmness he exuded, made Sarah hesitate. "Hello, Jacob," Sarah said, trying to sound friendly but unable to hide the caution in her voice. "I'm a friend of Emily's. Can you tell me where you're from?" Jacob looked up from the book, smiling politely at Sarah. "Hello, Sarah. I was waiting for you too." Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Emily, the confusion clear in her eyes. "Waiting for me? Why were you waiting for me?" "Because you're important to Emily," Jacob replied, as if it were obvious. "She's going to need you to understand what's happening." Sarah frowned. "And what exactly is happening, Jacob? How do you know so much about us?" Jacob set the book aside and slowly stood up, walking over to where Sarah and Emily stood. "I know because he told me," he said, his voice soft but filled with an unsettling certainty. "Michael told me." Emily felt her heart tighten at the sound of her husband's name being spoken by Jacob. She exchanged a look with Sarah, who was clearly as perplexed as she was. "Jacob, please tell me what you mean by that. How could Michael have told you anything?" Jacob looked at Emily, his eyes seeming to see right through her. "Michael knew you would be alone after he was gone. He wanted you to know that he's still here somehow. I'm here to show you that." Sarah placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "This is very strange, Emily. Maybe we should take him to the police, see if they can help us figure out where he came from." But Emily shook her head. "I feel like the police won't help, Sarah. There's something more going on here. I can't explain it, but I feel like we need to figure this out on our own." Jacob smiled again, this time with a look of satisfaction, as if pleased with Emily's decision. "You're right, Emily. The police won't understand. But I can show you what you need to know." "What do you mean, Jacob?" Emily asked, the anxiety growing in her voice. "What can you show us?" Jacob took a step back, his eyes turning toward the window. "We need to go back to the cemetery. That's where you'll find the answers." Emily felt a chill run down her spine at those words. Go back to the cemetery. The idea of returning to the place where all this began was not something she wanted to do, but there was something in Jacob's voice that made her realize he was telling the truth. Sensing Emily's hesitation, Sarah spoke up. "Emily, are you sure about this? I mean, going back to the cemetery at night." "I don't know what to think, Sarah, but I feel like we have to do this. Something tells me the answers are there, and Jacob seems to know more than he's saying." Sarah sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to let Emily face it alone. "All right. If you think that's what we should do, I'm with you." Jacob just smiled, apparently pleased with the decision. "Let's go now. We don't have much time." The trio left the house and headed for the cemetery, with night already falling over Maplewood. The shadows were lengthening, and the air was heavy with the promise of rain. The path to the cemetery seemed longer and quieter than it had during the day. The trees that had seemed friendly now loomed over them, as if watching their every move. When they reached the cemetery, The place was deserted and shrouded in an unsettling gloom. The headstones stood like silent sentinels in the darkness, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves underfoot. Emily felt her heart race as they walked toward Michael's headstone, with Jacob leading the way. As they approached the headstone, Jacob stopped and turned to the two women. "Here," he said simply, pointing to Michael's grave. "This is where it all begins." Emily looked at her husband's grave, feeling a wave of sadness mixed with anticipation. "What should we do now, Jacob?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jacob did not answer immediately. He simply looked at the headstone and, with a gentle gesture, touched Michael's name engraved on the stone. The silence around them seemed to intensify, as if the world were holding its breath. Finally, Jacob spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "Michael wanted you to know that he's still here. He never left you, Emily. And I'm the proof of that." Emily looked at Jacob, tears forming in her eyes. "But how? How can you be the proof of that?" Jacob stepped closer to Emily, taking her hand once again, just as he had done before. "Because I'm a part of him. And a part of you. I'm the child you never knew you had." Jacob's words hit Emily like a blow. She was speechless, feeling the ground give way beneath her feet. Sarah, beside her, brought a hand to her mouth, clearly shocked. "A child?" Emily managed to whisper, her mind spinning. "But how? How is that possible?" Jacob looked at her with tenderness. "Before Michael died, he knew you were pregnant, but the accident happened before you could find out. I was never born, but I'm here now because you both loved me." And now, before we continue with the exciting conclusion to this story, I'd like to ask you who's been following along to subscribe to our channel, Deep Stories channel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with friends who also love emotional and meaningful stories. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us keep bringing you stories like this one. Now, let's see how Emily handles this revelation and what the future holds for her. Emily fell to her knees in front of Michael's headstone, the tears finally flowing freely. The pain of the loss, the pain of never knowing the child she and Michael could have had, was almost unbearable. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of peace, that Michael had found a way to be with her, to show that his love still existed in some form. Jacob knelt beside Emily, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're never alone, Emily. Michael is always with you. And I'll be here as long as you need me." Emily looked at the boy, her vision blurred by tears, but she knew she was seeing something beyond comprehension. She didn't know if Jacob was an angel, a spirit, or just a manifestation of her own love and pain. But what she did know was that he was there to help her move forward. "Thank you, Jacob," Emily whispered, feeling a wave of gratitude and sadness at the same time. "Thank you for showing me this." Jacob smiled, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw a glimmer in his eyes, a reflection of the love she and Michael had shared. "It's time for you to move on, Emily. Michael wants you to be happy, and I'll always be around." Emily nodded, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew that somehow she had to accept the loss and move forward. And as she held Jacob's hand, she knew she would never truly be alone. Night enveloped the cemetery, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt that there was a light within her. A light that Michael had somehow left to guide her. Part 4. The Farewell and a New Beginning. The darkness of night had already fully descended upon the cemetery when Emily finally rose from the ground, still holding Jacob's hand. The cold autumn wind blew gently, rustling the dry leaves that had gathered around the headstones, but curiously, Emily felt an inexplicable warmth inside her, as if the love she had shared with Michael was surrounding her, bringing a comfort she hadn't felt since his death. Sarah, who had been silent throughout the entire revelation, finally took a step forward. The expression on her face was a mixture of disbelief and understanding. She had been Emily's closest friend over the past few years and knew the depth of the pain she carried, but nothing had prepared her for what she had witnessed that night. "Emily," Sarah began hesitantly, "do you really believe that he is?" Emily, still emotional, looked at Sarah with an unexpected firmness. Yes, Sarah. Believe it. I can't explain how, but I feel that Jacob is truly part of Michael, part of me. And even though it defies all logic, my heart tells me it's true. Sarah slowly nodded, accepting the situation in a way only a true friend could. She knew that some things couldn't be explained, only felt. And as she looked at Jacob, she too sensed a presence, something special that couldn't be simply ignored. Jacob, Emily said softly, turning to the boy. I don't know how to thank you for everything. But what happens now? What do you want me to do? Jacob looked at Emily with eyes full of compassion and a wisdom far beyond his age. You've already done what you needed to do, Emily. You found me. And more importantly, you found what you needed to move on. Michael never wanted you to be trapped in pain. He always wanted you to be happy. Emily felt a single tear slide down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of acceptance. And you, Jacob, what will happen to you? Jacob smiled, a smile full of peace and serenity. I can't stay forever, Emily. I came to help you find the way, and now that you have, I need to go. But remember, I will always be a part of you, part of the love you and Michael shared. That love will never disappear. The idea of losing Jacob, of seeing him go, brought a pang of sadness to Emily's heart, but she knew he was right. She had spent so much time trapped in the pain of losing Michael that she had forgotten to live. Jacob had been the link that reconnected her to life, to the need to move forward, and as much as it hurt, she knew she had to let him go. Emily knelt in front of Jacob, holding his small hands in hers. I will never forget you, Jacob. You will always be a part of me. Thank you for giving me a new chance to live. Jacob looked at Emily with deep tenderness. I know you won't forget me, but now it's time for you to live for both of us, for you and for Michael. And whenever you look up at the night sky, remember that we're there, watching over you. With these words, Jacob took a step back, still holding Emily's gaze. The night around them seemed to brighten briefly, as if the moonlight were intensifying, pouring its light over the boy. Sarah, who had been watching everything, could hardly believe what she was seeing, but she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. Suddenly, Jacob began to slowly disappear, his form dissolving into the air like mist in the sun. Emily watched, her heart heavy, but at the same time, filled with a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew she was saying goodbye not only to Jacob, but also to a part of the pain she had carried for so long. When Jacob had completely vanished, Emily remained there, kneeling on the cemetery ground, her head tilted upward, looking at the stars that had begun to shine in the night sky. She didn't say a word, but in her heart, she felt as if she were conversing with Michael, feeling his presence, knowing that he was at peace, and that now, finally, she could be too. Sarah, still shocked by what had just happened, approached Emily and helped her to her feet. The two women stood in silence for a moment, just absorbing the serenity of the cemetery, the soft sound of the wind, and the gentle glow of the stars. Are you okay? Sarah finally asked, concerned for her friend. Emily smiled, a genuine smile, the first in a long time. Yes, Sarah. For the first time in a long time, I'm okay. I know it's going to be hard, but now I feel like I can move on. And I know that Michael is with me, somehow. Sarah squeezed Emily's hand, feeling a new hope grow in her friend. And I'll be here with you, Emily, every step of the way. The two walked back to the car in silence, leaving the cemetery behind, but carrying with them the sense that something special had happened there. Emily knew that from that moment on, her life would be different. There would be difficult days, of course, but she also knew that she would never be alone. The love she and Michael had shared was still alive, in ways she could never have imagined. And so, with a lighter heart and a more peaceful soul, Emily drove back home, ready to start a new chapter in her life. A chapter full of possibilities and hope, knowing that wherever she went, love would always be with her. Moral of the story. Emily's story teaches us that true love transcends the barriers of time and death. Even when we face the most painful losses, it is possible to find comfort in the certainty that those we love never truly leave us. They live on in our memories, in our actions, and sometimes in ways we cannot fully comprehend. What truly matters is how we choose to honor that love, moving forward with the certainty that, somehow, it will always be with us. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to show your support for our channel, Deep Stories channel. Like the video, share it with friends who also appreciate emotional stories. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming tales. Your participation is what allows us to continue sharing deep and meaningful stories with you. Until next time.